Hi everyone. In the previous class, we came to understand the meaning of management, and then we went on to understand what are the different roles that a person will play when he or she becomes a manager. In today's class, we are going to understand what exactly is the classification in which management falls. There have been many debates and discussions as to whether management is a science, it is an art, or is it a profession, because we are not able to put that under a single heading. Now, I'm going to talk to you about how management falls into all of these three categories. Also, we will further go on to understand whether management was developed very early in time or how exactly did this thought process of management come into play. So, beginning with whether management is a science, an art, or a profession. What makes a discipline a science? A science is a discipline in which whatever is said or stated can be empirically verified, or rather it can be investigated using a systematic method. A science, the first major point is it has a systematic and empirical method that is used for inquiry, or rather for investigation. And the second point is that the information that we collect from this inquiry or this investigation can be verified with logical experiments, can be verified with numbers. And the third most important thing is whatever data we collect is cumulative in nature, and this can be confirmed and ordered. Now let us compare these three characteristics of a science to management and understand whether management is a science. Now, management definitely has a very systematic method of being checked, or rather, whenever you need to carry out management, there is a systematic procedure, there are certain steps that we need to follow. Now, is this systematic step empirical in nature? What is the meaning of this word, empirical? Empirical means something that can be verified by observation. Can management have this? Yes, because management depends on body language, management depends on a series of observations that are taking place, management depends on putting all of these body language skills into practice. Therefore, the first point is proved that management definitely has an empirical method for inquiry. The second point that we had mentioned in terms of a science is that whatever data is collected from a science inquiry can be ordered, analyzed, and also accumulated. Whereas in management, whatever data we collect can only be structured, it can be ordered. It cannot be analyzed and said that there is a complete, perfect structure, that this is the only way that management can take place. Hence, management has a drawback in this point wherein the data can only be organized, or rather can only be put in order. The third most important point of any discipline that is a science is that whatever data is collected is cumulative in nature and it can be communicated. I can write a formula to prove to you that this is what Pythagoras theorem states, or I can write a theory to prove to you that this is what the law of physics states. Whereas in management, though I can accumulate the data over time, stating that this is the way a particular manager will behave in a certain situation, and I can communicate it to you. But the communication is intangible. It is not tangible, or rather it cannot be physically felt as in a science subject or as in a discipline that deals with science like mathematics or anything of that sort. Here, management falls in drawback wherein whatever communication is given in terms of data, it is intangible in nature. So what is the conclusion that we can draw? Management is definitely a science, but it is not an exact science. What do we mean by not an exact science? Management definitely gives us guidelines as to how we have to go about a particular skill or how we have to carry out a particular operation, but it does not give you a standard operating procedure stating that this is the only way that you can manage. What makes a profession an art? An art is a profession that has the following salient features. The first being the use of knowledge principles. What are the knowledge principles that you use? When a person is an artist, it could be not just in drawing, it could be a person who writes literature, it could be a person who is into social work, it could be any form of art. What is art? Art is something that has knowledge principles. Definitely management uses a lot of knowledge principles that have come over the years for its implementation. The second most important thing about art is creativity skills that are involved. There are a lot of creative skills that an artist needs to develop. Management definitely uses creative skills of managers to combine both human and non-human resources. The third most important point for an art is that it has to have a personal touch. Whereas here in management, you do not have any personal touch in whatever principles that are being carried out. The fourth and the final point that makes a discipline an art is constant practice. Management requires constant practice. A person becomes a manager over time, and his principles and practices evolve with his experience. So if we observe here, among these 4 points, it's just the third point that does not completely comply with the form of an art, which is why we say that management is partly an art and not completely an art. The last point is whether management is a profession or not. What makes something a profession? A profession has a systematic existence of principles. There is an existence of an organized and systematic language. There is a description of a particular job. This makes something, or rather makes a discipline to be called a profession. Management does not have any systematic method or any rule of thumb that this is the way it has to be followed. So management does not comply to this particular point. For a discipline to be called a profession, also there needs to be formalized training, and also there has to be some sort of experience that is required. Managers definitely require training to suit the particular role in which they are playing. It complies to the second point. For a discipline to be called a profession, there needs to be the existence of an association or an organization. And also for a person to be a manager, he needs to be part of an organization or an association. He needs to be part of a group of people so that he can manage a group of people. For a discipline to be called a profession, there needs to be an ethical code of conduct, whereas for management, there is an ethical code of conduct, but this is not standard. This differs from organization to organization and person to person. And therefore, management only partially complies to this particular point. The last most important point that makes any discipline to be called a profession is the fact that fees are charged on the type of service that is being given. For example, if you are employed as a professor, or if you are employed as an engineer, if you are employed as a doctor, whatever services that you provide to the people who come to you as customers, you charge them some amount of money. A manager also is paid a particular sum for his managerial skills. This makes management to be called only partly as a profession and not completely as a profession. What is the role of management and administration? Management and administration, though they sound like two different generic terms, they are somehow interlinked with each other. So this we will study under 3 different topics, or rather 3 different views. The first view that is believed is that management is broader than administration. The second view is that administration is broader than management. And the third view is that they are identical. Now these views are held by different writers and different philosophers. We will take these views individually. We will consider one view. The first view that we will consider is that administration is a lot more broader than management. This view believes that those who are on the administrative end are into making decisions, policies, deciding the rules and regulations of the organization, and other statements of purpose. So here, in this view, it is believed that the board of directors play a major role here. If you observe this graph, the administration portion, that is the decision-making portion in terms of deciding policies, deciding rules and regulations, is broader in nature than the management part. Because as we have studied the definition of management, management also involves executing, coordinating, directing, controlling, which means there is going to be some level of execution. And the board of directors, though they are involved in it, they have a very lesser role to play when it comes to execution of the policies which they have already decided. Moving further down, we can observe that as the hierarchy decreases, the number of people involved in the administration will reduce, or rather the people who are going to be in the administration section, their roles reduce and the management increases. Moving on to the second view, which states that management is broader than administration. Here you can see that we are talking about the people who are involved in the execution of maybe a shop floor activity. So if I have to relate this to, say for example, a college or an educational institution setup, we can talk about it like this. The board of directors involving maybe the entire trust of the organization, including the president of the organization, they are involved in deciding what kind of branches need to be there in the college, or rather what kind of educational system that they are going to use to impart knowledge to the students. policies that will be governed in their college or in their institution, and also a little bit of execution of the same policies. Coming to the next, we can have the president over here. In our case, we can consider the principal to be there at the president's position. He is involved again in most of the administrative affairs, but very less in the execution. Though it's very less in the management and execution portion, it is a lot more than the board of directors. Moving a step further, the general manager can be the HODs of all the departments. They are involved in both administration as well as management, which means to say that they will be in touch with the board of directors as well as the principal to understand what policies are required and then give the directions and also make sure that it is controlled at the departmental level. Moving further, you can have maybe professors, assistant professors, associate professors who are again involved in not directly policy making, but ensuring that there are certain decisions that are taken maybe at the mid-level so as to comply by the administrative policies that have been set up by the higher levels and then executing it at the student level. Moving further, we have the foreman. In this, we can take the non-technical staff or the non-teaching staff who are involved in very less policy and decision making, but more of carrying out instructions that are given by the people above. So if you compare this particular situation to an educational institution, probably this is how we will understand it. If we go into the same thing in a marketing sector or in any factory sector, you can understand that the board of directors are not directly involved with the shop floor work, though they have a part of the execution being a part of them, because they will also overlook to see whether the final product complies with whatever administrative decision they have made. The third and final view is that both management and administration are alike. What this view states is that you need not employ a separate set of people for administration and management. You can have the same people who are doing planning, who are doing organizing, and who are doing staffing. Now, these kind of situations, or rather this kind of view, you can see in a small scale industry, in a small startup, wherein everyone is involved in almost all the procedures. So if you have a small startup kind of a software company, you will have the same person who's doing the software development. He might also be the same person who's a manager. He might be the data analyst of the company. He might also be the person who is working with the human resource. This is usually done or carried out for smaller industries. So with this, I hope management and administration, their similarities and differences are clear. How did the concept of management ever evolve? Everything that we know on earth has come through some sort of an evolution. It started off as a brief idea of something else and was always later evolved into something that we can use today, or has rather come into the state of usage which we are using it today. Now, if we look at management also evolved over time. It was something that started as an early classical approach, went on to a neo-classical approach, and then now we have the modern approaches to management. What are these three different classifications under which management has evolved? The first one, like I said, is an early classical approach. This existed between the 18th and the 20th century, and it saw a lot of growth in this small time frame, that is between 1750 to 1950. In this time frame, management saw different changes. It started off with the different kinds of industries that were present back then. Moving on, the neoclassical approach came about in 1927 to 1932. So this particular time frame saw a lot of changes again in the management and its approaches. When we go forward, 1950 onwards, we adopted a lot of modern approaches to management, where people understood and devised different ways to suit the situation at that particular moment. To start with the early management approach, we have to understand that this has happened, or rather can be spread over three different categories. The first being the effect of the Industrial Revolution, then the evolution of scientific management, and the contribution of three major pioneers of management, that is F.W. Taylor, Henry Fayol, Frank and Lillian Gilbert. These three people contributed a lot to the early management approach. To begin with, what happened in the Industrial Revolution? We all know that the Industrial Revolution was dominated by the cottage industry. So during this time, in the year 1770, there was something called the spinning jenny, which was invented. This spinning jenny was used in handloom industries for spinning yarn. Now the spinning jenny had its own drawbacks, major drawbacks being that it required a lot of hard work by manual work it required a lot of manual work in its usage. Now this spinning jenny, which was invented by Mr. James Cartwright in the year 1770, was improved by adding what we know as a water frame by Richard. Richard invented the water frame in the year 1771. Again, this water frame and the spinning jenny put together were not able to suffice for the needs of the people back then. And then it was further evolved into something that was even greater, and that was the power loom. The power loom was the next great invention that was invented by Mr. Edmund Cartwright in the year 1785. Now, one thing we need to note is that all of these things, all of these inventions, all of them worked on hydraulic power, which again required a lot of manual exertion until the steam engine was invented by James Watt. Until the steam engine was invented by James Watt. The invention of the steam engine led to what we know as the Industrial Revolution, and with this, people had a change in attitude and people had a lot of changes in the way they looked at management. This is how the early classical management evolved with the effect of the Industrial Revolution. After the Industrial Revolution took place, the evolution of management saw a different phase. The next phase was due to the evolution of what we know as scientific management. When did this scientific management take place? Scientific management came about in the 19th century, and this scientific management happened because there were two forces that were operating at that time. One was there were two forces operating against each other at that time. These two forces were putting in efforts to put forth their own types of rules. What were the two forces? The two forces were because of the effort of practicing managers who were trying to create standard practices for carrying out management skills and to get work done and simplify this work that was getting done. And then we had the effort of scientists who were trying to develop different scientific methods to prove that management is also a science. So what is this scientific management, or what is this scientific method or scientific identification? It is something, or it is a procedure that uses some sort of logic for verification. At the end of it all, management saw a different phase. At that point in time, before that, there were a lot of conflicts in the thoughts of people. The first is, people used to concentrate on a specific amount of output or a specific level of output. It could be in goods or services. But here we are referring to the goods especially. But scientific management brought about the fact that they can go for maximum output and not a specific level of output. That would really help in certain industries. Another thing is, we will believe in what is science and not rule of thumb. The effort of a manager, that those days the practicing managers were trying to develop a certain rule of thumb stating that this is a standard procedure with which work has to be carried out, otherwise the work will not be simplified. Whereas the scientific management evolution taught us that science is the only way out and not rule of thumb. The science we are referring to here is not an exact science. The science we are referring to here is that whatever managerial rules are being set forth are logically verified by people from past experiences. The next thing that was, the next problem that the industry faced in those days was an individualistic approach. Everyone was working for their own individual satisfaction. Everyone was working for their own individual benefit. Scientific management taught them that we are dealing with cooperation and not individualism. We are not worried about the individual person who is working at the machine, but the cooperation of the entire team when carrying out a particular project. One more major change that the scientific management brought about in the evolution of management is the fact that there are different kinds of views to different situations, and we are dealing with harmony and not discord. We want all the employees to be in harmony with each other and not at loggerheads with each other. So these 5 major points that I have listed were all a contribution to from the scientific management part of the evolution of management. Next, we move on to see the contribution of pioneers in the field of management. These pioneers were always there right from the very beginning of the concept of management. The 3 of them are F.W. Taylor, Henry Fayol, Frank and Lillian Gilbert. Now we shall see their individual contributions to management. We first start with Frederick Taylor. F.W. Taylor's name is Frederick Winston Taylor, and he is called as the father of scientific management. He developed 2 major thoughts or published 2 books. One was Shop Management in the year 1903 and Scientific Management in the year 1911. F.W. Taylor suggested that the shop floors of machine shops can be classified based on the following. The first is we would have to separate planning from doing. What he meant to say is that foremen were always overburdened with planning the operations as well as carrying out the same. And this was a burden on them. It used to eat into their time and also used to eat into the productivity of any organization. And therefore, with this, the planning department was created as a separate entity in every organization. The next contribution that F.W. Taylor gave was that the entire shop floor should be made into a functional organization. Divide the shop floors based on specialization, and therefore we started having different departments in every kind of shop floor ever since then. He developed time study next. Time study divided each and every element in the work cycle into smaller elements, and their individual times were always studied for us to be able to understand how much overall time it would take for a particular job to be conducted. He also came about with something what we call as a fair day's work, where people were paid piecewise. So if a worker carried out substantial amount of work on a certain day, on a certain work day, he always got the wages that he required. Now these wages would differ from the number of or the amount of output that he gave on a particular day. This fair day's work that he came up with also took into consideration the fatigue factor of humans. Recruitment was a challenge back in the day, and F.W. Taylor gave a suggestion for scientific recruitment and training. He always suggested that after recruitment, every person in the organization should be scientifically and technically trained to suit the opportunity given to him. He designed training, and hence we have a training department for all kinds of jobs in a shop floor. He suggested that management should train every employee to bring out the best of his faculties in him so that he may be able to give the best output or give the best that he can for the generation of output for the industry. A major revolution that F.W. Taylor caused was differential payment strategies. According to F.W. Taylor, he suggested that a worker be paid if he made standard number or standard pieces of work pieces in a day, and if he did something extra, he attached an incentive to it. According to him, this would encourage workers to do better, and he took into consideration each and every worker and employee in every department, and this policy brought about a lot of encouragement and reduced the idle time in the workers. Because of this differential payment, Taylor suggested that there should be a standardization of tools and equipment given to all the workers, because the workers who were going to be paid differentially were based on the amount of products they were able to produce, the number of products that they were able to give in. And hence, because of this, the workers were supposed to be given out with equal type of tools, equal functionality of tools and equipment, and this was to be observed by the managers or the foremen on the shop floor. Henry Fayol was the next contributor to the evolution of management thought, and he was called the father of modern management. Henry Fayol, by profession, was a mining engineer, and he published a major book in the year 1915 called The General and Industrial Administration. This book gave light to what is the foundation for modern management. Henry Fayol said that every industrial enterprise can be divided into 6 categories. So the first one was technical, which dealt with all the production practices that are happening in the industry, manufacturing, production, and adaptation to different changes that are happening in the world at whatever be the moment. The second one was, the first category was technical. The second category was accounting, which would take care of all the funds and budgets for the production purposes. The third category was commercial. These dealt with the marketing and reaching out to the customers and doing all that was required for selling of the products that were manufactured, and also procurement of raw material. The next was security. Security dealt with protection of the entire factory environment, stock verification, statistical protection of whatever be the property that was there within the organization. And then the commercial. This dealt with buying and selling of products on the outside of the organization. And the fifth one was the finance team, which dealt with the optimum usage of the capital that was provided to the organization. And the last one was the managerial activities. The managerial activities was in charge of planning, organizing, commanding, leading, controlling every activity in the organization. His contribution was a major foundation to what we call as the modern approach today. The last people were Frank and Gilbreth, and these people came about in the year 1868 to 1924. Now, these were the pioneers in the field of what we know as motion study. They contributed to the principles of motion economy. They developed what we know as motion study, and also they invented a lot of things like the microchronometer and others. So the contribution of these 3 pioneers to the field of evolution of early classical approach of management is what we have seen over here. Let's get into see what the modern approach to management is. This can be divided into the following categories. We have first the quantitative approaches, the behavioral approaches, the systems approaches, and the contingency approaches. Now, these are the different types of approaches which you have in the modern management evolution. What we are trying to say here is that there are different ways of looking at management in the modern day. In the first one, which is a quantitative approach, we use logic. So here you have logical approaches which use generally maths and symbols. Here we use mathematics and statistics as well as a lot of symbols to represent data. Here what we mean to say is that management is carried out using different techniques of mathematical basis. What we are trying to say here is that for every information that we get in management, we use the support of a mathematical tool. Now, what are these different mathematical tools that are there in this particular approach? We have operations research, we have operations management, we have management and information systems, engineering economics. These are the various statistical and mathematical tools that are used to validate this quantitative approach to modern management. The next approach to modern management that we see is the behavioral approach. This is related to the kind of employees that we have on board. So here, this approach uses behavioral sciences, psychology, sociology, anthropology to understand the way human beings behave in various environments, and goes on to explain exactly how the human will behave at that particular time. So here this focuses on designing different jobs to meet Maslow's hierarchy. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as we can classify, are different. He has psychological needs, physiological needs, which are air, water, food, and all of those things. Then he requires safety. An employee has to feel safe. He has to feel secure about his job as well as about his personal life. Then he also has to have a sense of love and belonging. So he needs to develop friendships even at the workplace. Then he also has to go through what is called as a high boost in his self-esteem. He should feel like his position is important. He should feel important in the organization. He should feel important in whatever role that he is playing. This is the self-esteem portion. And right on top is the part where he has to have where he has to be the best of himself. And this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So in the behavioral approach, Maslow has said that whatever jobs that are being given to people should be given based on this hierarchy of needs. So this uses motivation, uses group dynamics, uses different team outings, creating different kinds of exercises for people in the organization and the workplace, then leadership and communication skill programs. All of these development programs are used in the behavioral approach to management. Then we have the systems approach. The systems approach looks at the management, in the systems approach, management looks as the entire organization as one system. This system is mainly relating one wing to the next. So here it focuses on making sure that none of the departments are thinking individually and they are all interrelated with each other. So here the entire organization is considered and not the individual. It is not an individual staff member. Finally, in the contingency approach, this is based on one premise. The premise is that management is situational in nature and there is no one way of managing people. There is not one single way that this is the rule of thumb that only this way management can take place. This rules out that kind of a behavior and creates an interrelationship of all the basic elements in the organization. So these are the different approaches to the evolution So these are the different approaches to evolution of management thought.